We're joined today by Alan, Mark and Clarissa. Alan and Mark are from South West Water, Clarissa's from the Environment Agency. Thank you very much for joining us. You'll be item 6 on the agenda. Thank you. So during the meeting, if there's a fire alarm, we all follow Kathy. So that should be fairly straightforward. Already. I was going to ask Kathy for the apologies. I think we have Councillor Casbolt. Councillor Viney might be joining us remotely. Do we have any other apologies? He's not here, no, so we'll record that. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 2, which is confirmation of minutes. I assume we've all had a good read. Is there anything anybody would like to talk about there? Okay. Just want to have a show of hands to say we're happy with that. Very much. And then I'd just like to invite any declarations of interest. Has anybody got any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests? So has anybody got any interest to declare? So item 4 is urgent business, and we have no urgent business. Item 5 is public forum, and we've had no prior requests received. Kathy's restarting her computer. I think we need that for the presentations. Would you like to introduce yourselves before we get the presentations?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Clarissa Newell. I am the Area Environment Manager for Water, Land and Biodiversity at the Environment Agency for Devon, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly.
Thanks, Chair. My name's Alan Burrows. I'm Director of External Liaison at South West Water and based in Exeter.
I'm Mark Worsfold and I'm the Director of Asset Management at South West Water.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your time. Waiting for computers, the story of my life. All right, if we have the South West Water presentation first, please. We're going to try and keep this section of the meeting to an hour so we don't get all too tired. So thank you.
I think the slides are on. Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll go and we can catch up if that's okay, Chair. So just to give you a little bit of background, yeah, my name's Alan Burrows. I've been working in the environmental sector for about 36 years previous to joining South West Water. I worked for the Environment Agency for 30 years, so that's my background. Mark, do you want to explain a bit of yours, and hopefully the slides will come.
Okay, Mark Worsfold. Thank you, Alan. I've been in the water industry since privatisation. I've been involved in every possible part of the sector, including the regulators, and I've worked at 2 different water companies. I've been at South West Water for the last 8 years, and I'm involved in planning the forward programme and the investment that's required in the next 5-year period.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got some slides up here. What I've done is try to pick out what I believe some of the key themes. What I've done is picked out what I believe some of the key themes are from the questions that have been posed. There may be some additional questions that you might want to ask, but I thought I'll pull out some of the main things first. So if we go on to the next slide, and I'll explain a little bit about South West Water. We're a company of around about 2,500 employees. We cover Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, but we also cover Bristol Water Area and Bournemouth Water for drinking water. And you may have heard recently in the last week that Pennon also just acquired Sutton and East Surrey Water Company, but that's going through the current conversations with the CMA. So I'm going to focus primarily on South West Water and what we're doing, with a little bit of a focus also on your So I think one of the themes I've picked up in correspondence from yourselves and from other scrutiny committee meetings is particular interest and focus on pollutions and storm overflow monitoring. And within our water fit strategy, we've got one particular theme, which is called nurturing healthy rivers and seas. And the aim of that is, as it says there, to focus on the number of serious pollution incidents to zero by 2025. And I'll come on to what that means for South West Water as a whole, but also for West Devon Borough Council as well, if that's okay. So if we take the next slide. Okay, so meeting where I haven't had to talk about bathing waters, but I think it's suffice to say they are important for our area, and we have achieved 100% compliance with bathing water standards in the southwest region, bar one beach, which was in Cornwall, and that was that beach where we have actually no assets there. So for every beach where we have an asset, all of them are complying with the bathing water standards, and I'm sure Clarissa will mention something about that in a minute if she has that in her presentation. If we look at pollutions, what we can see is from 2020 to 2022, we have actually reduced the number of pollutions. Majority of those are what we would call Category 3 or minor pollution incidents, as defined by the Environment Agency, and there have been very few serious incidents. In fact, the last serious incident that was categorised as a Cat 2 incident, and that's the last time that we've had a serious incident in your particular area. Overall, the number of serious pollution incidents have also reduced over time. What I will say is 2023, and we're currently going through that data. It's being quality assured and assessed by the Environment Agency, but we are going to see an upturn or an uptick in the number of pollution incidents for 2023. Can't give you the exact figure yet because that's subject to conversations between ourselves and the EA, and we'll need to go through that assurance process. So unfortunately, whilst we've had a significant reduction from 2020 to 2022, 2023, because it was so wet, one of the wettest on record, having gone from one of the driest on record previous year, it has had an impact on our pollution numbers. But again, all of those, bar one or two, are minor incidents, so they're not the serious incidents that you might see elsewhere in the country. On to storm overflows. I'm pleased to say that as of the end of last year, we had 100% monitoring on all of our storm overflows, ahead of the government target. For West Devon Borough Council, there are 89 storm overflows within your district or borough. 31 of them are already meeting the government targets that have been set for 2050. So we are going to be focused on the others that aren't meeting that target. We have put our plan into the Secretary of State, and we're waiting for that confirmation that that plan can be published. And that plan will show when we're going to be investing and where we're going to be investing and when we will be meeting those targets. But I suppose the key message to take away from here is that we are going ahead of government targets, which is 2050. We plan to have it all resolved and met the targets by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of government targets. I've talked about bathing waters. There aren't any, but we do appreciate that it's a very important factor for not only the southwest region, but those that will be coming to your particular borough may be going to beaches as well. So it's important to note the fact that we're doing everything we can to ensure that compliance is continuously achieved, but also with the fact that we move from satisfactory to good to excellent for all of our bathing waters in southwest region. River water quality, the River Basin Management Plan, and Clarissa and I shared our presentation so we don't talk over each other, as it were, but River Basin Management Plan clearly shows that there are some things that South West Water does need to do in order to help improve river water quality and achieve good ecological status. Overall, South West Water assets contribute to around about 12% of the reasons for not achieving good ecological status within the South West region. For your particular borough, it's a little bit higher, but a lot of those are related to reservoirs and the fact that reservoirs do create a barrier to fish migration. Because the South West region has a strong focus on salmon and sea trout, which is migratory fish, obviously those reservoirs can cause an issue to migration. But we do need the reservoirs, obviously, to provide drinking water. So they are, for your particular borough itself, most of your rivers are at the headwaters of the Dart and the Torridge and the Tor. So generally speaking, they are in really good status, and I'm sure Clarissa will explain some of that in a moment. So what else are we doing on pollutions and storm overflows? We've got our monitors in. We've got a plan to achieve an average of no more than 20 spills across all 1,342 of our storm overflows by 2025. And we've also got a plan to achieve no more than 10 spills for all of our storm overflows that enter near or onto a bathing water, a shellfish water. I've got to say that on the last slide. In addition to that, we're also now looking at how can we understand our network in real time better than we have done in the past. So we're installing a significant number of sewer level monitors which will show us how our network is responding. And that's because most of our pollutions now tend to come from the foul network, where we haven't traditionally had monitors in place. We will have monitors in place at our sewage pumping stations and treatment works, so our central control centre can know what's happening there. It's that foul network where we need to improve that understanding. We're working with others, yourselves, on planning to look at sustainable urban drainage. We're also looking to use natural-based solutions, particularly upstream thinking, to see if we can slow the flow, see if we can improve the catchment above some of our systems in order to protect our network itself. And then finally, there's something around the Love Your Loo and Think Sink. We have the 3 Ps, pee, poo and paper. The network really isn't designed to take anything else. It's the analogy I use, it's like putting diesel in a petrol car or vice versa. Your car won't operate because it's not expecting those things in there. So we have supported the government's campaign to remove the use of wet wipes in the system. There's also misconnections, and we do work quite closely with your borough and others to look at how we can improve the links between building control and ourselves as well. I'll move on very quickly, so I'm conscious of the time. The challenges we face, I mean, I think it's obvious extreme weather, hotter, drier summers, rising sea levels and growing population. And there are a number of things that we're doing to improve that. So we move on to the next slide. One of the things we are doing is to look at natural-based solutions. And one of the questions, I think, in your pre-submitted questions are what are we doing to achieve or work towards net zero? There's a lot that we're doing now in terms of green first technology. So we're looking in numerous places within the Southwest region to see what we can do to use the green infrastructure in order to improve how our assets work, but also to help us use less energy in producing either drinking water or actually treating wastewater as well. And this map just gives you an idea that we're working across many places within the southwest region, particularly on Dartmoor, which is part of the West Devon Borough Council area. The other implications for climate change are that, so we know things are changing, but how can you assure us that we're going to have enough water resources as we go forward? We produced our water resources management plan in autumn of last year. We submitted that. We've got responses back on that, and we're now focusing on what does that mean in terms of our general direction for the water resources management plan. The Environment Agency and DEFRA are the ones that provide us with the comments on that. But we've also received a number of responses back from stakeholders. So some of the things that we're doing on water resources, we're finding new sources. So you may know that we are developing new sources in Cornwall. We're also going to be developing in Bristol at some stage Cheddar 2, which is a big reservoir. I can hear some of you thinking, so what, we're in the middle of Devon, but the other option we're looking at is trying to connect those sources around, because sometimes it's really wet in West Cornwall and really dry in East Devon, and we need to be able to move those resources around. So next slide, please. The next thing on drainage and wastewater management plans, and this is Mark's area. What are we doing to understand how do we manage our network on a longer term basis? We have produced drainage and wastewater management plans. Again, the Environment Agency look at those to test whether or not our scenarios are correct, and we receive comments back from the local authorities in terms of what they can do to help us contribute to managing our network and wastewater overall. That's just not our own network, but separation of surface water, etc., etc. We may have a number of questions again on that. Next slide, please. So the final question was around how do we manage, do we understand what our risks are? Yes, we absolutely understand what our risks are, and you'll find in the South West Water annual report and financial statement a number of pages, I think it's page 49 to 59, which will describe what our risks are. And those risks translate into our plan for PR24. And PR24 sets out our priorities for the planning period 2025 to 2030, water quality and resilience, so in other words, drinking water quality and the resilience of our network. Have we got enough water? Is it of the right quality? Storm overflows and pollutions. Let's reduce the number of storm overflows. Let's reduce the number of pollutions. Net zero in environmental gain. So what are we doing to help achieve the UK's government target of net zero by 2030? And there's a lot of information I will provide after this rather than go through it now and provide a link to that, because I think it's important. And also the final thing is delivering for customers and addressing affordability. So within our next plan, we're putting aside £200 million to address affordability issues within our region, which is the greatest affordability part, I believe, that we've put in compared to other planning periods. So that's what we're doing. That addresses the risks that are in our South West Water annual report and financial statement, and those priorities are on our website. I will pause there. I believe that's the last slide.
Thank you very much, Alan. Really appreciate that. Just before we move on to the next presentation, does the committee have anything which is they want to ask about those slides which is unclear or needs clarifying? So we'll move on to questions after the next presentation. But is there anything unclear?
It just struck me when you were talking about the storm overflow plan. And what struck me was you've got however many hundreds to do by 2040. And what I'm thinking is what's happened in West Devon with broadband, because we're so remote and so rural, that when you come to look at the list of however many hundred to do, you're going to do the big population densities, and effectively West Devon will end up at the back of the queue, so we'll get ours done in 2039 and 2040. So I just wondered what the approach will be on that.
So, as you can imagine, there are 1,342. About 800 of those need investment to occur. And the government process says we should be taking 25 years to do that. And that's the timeline that they've set out. stood and thought about, well, actually what we need to do is we need to go engage with customers. We need customers to tell us what the priorities are and how those should best be delivered. And the customer feedback that we had said, we want you to concentrate around bathing waters, shellfish waters, because those are things that drive the economy within the southwest, and that those should have the highest priority. We also have government targets around areas that have ecological harm, where the discharges could be causing ecological harm, particularly to things like invertebrates and things in the rivers. Again, we've identified where those are. And then the rest of them are actually being prioritised based upon spill frequency. So the ones that are spilling at the highest frequency are the ones that we're bringing forward. So we've looked at that across the whole of the region, and not surprisingly, what that says in the first 5 years is we need to get those bathing waters and shellfish waters right, because that's right for the economy in the southwest, and that's what customers and tourism says we should be putting in place first and foremost. So the first 5 years is very much focused around those. When we looked at the plan for the first 5 years, and then we looked at what we needed to do in totality, we thought, and we proposed, that actually instead of spending 25 years to deliver it, we can do it in 15. So we are the only company in England and Wales that has said we're going to deliver this programme in 15 years, and therefore we're going to be doing it 10 years ahead of the targets that government have set. What that does mean, though, is that particularly some of the inland ones are, as you say, prioritised towards the back, but where they're high spillers, we're tackling those and bringing those forward so that those can be...
That's fine, thank you.
Could we move on to Clarissa's presentation, please? Thank you.
Agency, as I said earlier, I've been working for the Environment Agency, thank you, for 20 years, and that's in a background of audit and regulation and more recently management. I think one of the things I wanted to say before I go through my presentation is that it's not all absolutely terrible, and in the last few decades we have seen robust regulation and real improvement in our water quality. We are seeing that water quality has improved, and we are seeing that bathing waters have improved significantly in the time that I've been working for the Environment Agency, and I keep holding on to that when it does feel like things are getting worse and worse. There is, however, much more to be done. And, you know, whilst it's absolutely brilliant to have this transparency with the water companies, being able to see the number of spills and that increased data, and having increased public interest is also really good for the Environment Agency, because we can kind of wave our flag of needing more resource to make sure that we're monitoring and enforcing well. It is important, however, that the kind of spill numbers are taken in context, and whilst we see the numbers of spills that are happening, that can look very concerning. What we're not seeing is what those contain and what the content of that spill is, and often that will be during real wet weather, and those spills will be very dilute. So in a minute I'll be showing you some slides of the ecological status and the chemical status in the rivers, and questions that come in very regularly are, if there's this many spills, how come it's not impacting how you're monitoring? And a lot of it is because it's very dilute. Saying that, are they really spilling when it's raining and when it's dilute? And that's something that the Environment Agency does need to get to the bottom of. So we are doing data monitoring on this. We have a national team that is really focused on this, so we have environment officers properly recruited in to properly investigate that data and understand, did it happen when it was raining? Did it discharge much longer than it should have done? And looking into that. That's a really large investigation, and we are choosing which sites to select to investigate according to some of the parameters that were just mentioned there. So the frequency, does it look really odd, the numbers, the ecological harm, the protective or sensitive areas that those discharges could be entering. That's how we're prioritising that work. The results of that investigation are ongoing at the moment, but will be publicly available when they are, and hopefully that will trigger change, because yes, it's true, we have got less serious incidents happening from the water companies, but there is that kind of diffuse, ongoing kind of additions to our rivers that we want to stop. So other improvements in how we're regulating. The Environment Agency, and I've got our responsibilities up there, as well as a regulator, we offer advice and guidance. So we work very closely with South West Water in making sure that the plans and the wonderful ideas that they've just shared with you here are tangible and real. So me and my teams will be meeting regularly with them to understand what's really going on They have a wonderful pollution prevention plan. What does that mean for this town, for this area? What are you actually doing? So that's a really important part of our job as a regulator. We also have national teams that influence government policy. So in area teams, which is the teams that I regulate, so I manage. So I manage the land and water team, so environment officers going out to inspect permits, and also agricultural teams as well that are going out to talk to farmers. And I think it's really important to remind everyone that we are regulating all users of the land, not just water companies as a regulator. We're working to improve habitat and increase biodiversity net gain, because holding water in catchment is really, really important for how sewage treatment works perform. And we're encouraging investment in the environment as well, and enabling people to understand that the environment is worth something. We're using technology to understand better what's going on, increase monitoring. We're also reviewing permit fees to make sure that permit holders such as sewage treatment works are paying the right amount to enable us to regulate effectively. One of the questions I had around impact of funding for the Environment Agency. So I have 3 land and water teams, and that equates to about 24 officers. So that's for the whole of Devon, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. And that also is to regulate quarries, farmers and all that kind of industry. I have 1 agricultural team which consists of 12 officers who focus on agricultural regulation, and they prioritise their inspections according to what the Water Framework Directive status of the river catchments are. So we will visit the catchments that are not meeting the Water Framework Directive requirements. These officers will do permit compliance and incident attendance, which we just managed to do, but increased freedom of information requests and letters coming into the Environment Agency is something that we are really struggling to keep up with. It's fantastic we've got this public interest, but it's also causing a lot of work. And I did some sums the other day, and I think I'm losing 2 officers a year on writing letters back to the public. So we need to think about how we can get smarter about keeping people informed, hence us coming to some of these kind of events. Monitoring, we could do with more money for monitoring so that we can kind of gather more evidence. And we also have other teams that are not under my department that are looking at planning to make sure that all the plans that South West Water are putting in place are realistic and can be done and are being chased, and make sure that that happens. The government is talking about water transformation, and the Environment Agency is talking about bringing strength in place by having a more focused team on regulating the water companies. This is something I really welcome, but the Secretary of State hasn't signed that off yet. So we're really hoping that goes through so that we can have a more consistent approach to how we regulate the water company. Hopefully that would enable us to do a more doable job. There were some questions on soils. There isn't any legislation to enable me to kind of enforce soils that cause flooding, but we do advise where flooding has taken place, and we will look at kind of compaction and soil erosion, and where we think sediment is causing an issue to water quality. But I'll stop there because I'm very aware of time. Oh, I haven't even gone through my slides, sorry. I'll share the slides. I think I've said most of it. If I could just, go on to that one. This slide is explaining that the main point source pollution causes for West Devon are around agriculture, land management, as well as water industry, trade and private discharges. For the Tavy, the River Tavy, abandoned metal mines are a particular impact on the water quality data. Compared to the rest of the country, the rivers in West Devon are looking good. There has been decline of migratory fish, but that could be due to climate change, and we are doing lots of investigation on that. And sorry, if I could just go on to the next one. I have shared these, but the links here take you to gov.uk. I'm sure some of you have already looked at these, where you can see whether your rivers are meeting poor, moderate, good, or high. And it's a really good website to have a look. And you can also download Excel spreadsheets that will give you exactly where is meeting poor or failed or good, and what parameter is the problem. The numbers, there are some failures there, but we test for kind of hundreds of different parameters. So when you look at it as a percentage, the water quality in this area is good, is looking good. I'm sorry, just one more, just to check I haven't missed anything. I just thought this is an interesting one. So this is the percentage of river length that are achieving good ecological status, and you can see that, so your area is the 10 to 25%. Speaking with the catchment coordinator today, you know, that is probably due to the agriculture when you look at the kind of types of land that is being affected there. So educating agriculture and making sure that we have a shift in how runoff is managed is really important. I'll just go to the final one. I will stop after this one. I've got some, you know, the kind of enforcement that's going on at the moment. So we've had a number of minor agricultural incidents in the area, and we are regularly having officers out to make sure that people are abiding by taking the right amount of water out of the rivers, which is also an environmental risk. We have regular incidents from runoff from development sites, and again, this all adds to the kind of diffuse pollution that is impacting the quality of your rivers. And we are regularly inspecting South West Water sites, and we do have some minor non-compliances there that we are working with South West Water, but there's nothing you know, very serious. And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions or clarification on those slides? If not, we can move on to our general questions. Yeah. No questions? Jane.
So, thank you very much for a really informative presentation, and there's lots of information on your website as well. You're telling a very sort of hopeful story, and I'd just like to sort of drill down a little bit more on the sort of pollution incidents. So you were being very candid about the fact that, you know, you were trying to improve on 2020, which I think you said it's 225 1 to 3 grade pollution incidents, and that had gone down to 2021, and 2022 was only 108, and then you were being very honest that it had gone up again for 2023, but the data's not finalised. But if we look back across, you know, the last 12 years, go back to 2011, we can see that, you know, 2020 was one of the very worst years. So although it looks like, if you only take the last 3 years, it looks great that there's been an improvement, actually, you know, we were down at 156 in 2014, and it went up to 225. So I'm sorry, it's a bit of a long preamble, but what I'm really interested in is there something that is really changing about your approach that makes you confident about reaching that target of bringing things right down by 2025? Because as a layperson, just looking at the figures, it looks very unrealistic. So can you explain in sort of more tangible, practical terms what's different now that hasn't been different over the last 12, 13 years?
Yeah, sure. So you're absolutely right, 2020 wasn't a good year. 2022 was. We had the second lowest absolute number of pollution instances across the water industry, but we do know we need to go further. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll say that again. 2020 wasn't good. We had too many. It was 225 pollution incidents. They are minor incidents. So Category 3 isn't a massive incident, but it is still a pollution incident. 2022 was the second lowest across the water industry as a whole. But what we're doing, we have to produce a pollution incident reduction plan every year, and that sets out what we're going to do to reduce pollutions further. And the 3 sorts of things that we'll be looking at, as I mentioned in my presentation briefly, is how can we use technology more than we have done in the past in areas where we've not used it previously. So we've got telemetry on our storm overflows, we've got telemetry on our pumping stations, and we've got telemetry on our sewage treatment works. But historically, we haven't had telemetry on the gravity sewer, the foul sewer, the bit that the Romans built very well 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And we're putting 9,000 sewer level monitors in by March of this year, with a plan to put in, I think is it 20,000 by 2025? Thank you. So that will give us the information and data we need to understand how the majority of our assets are working. And what that does, it gives us an early warning to see whether or not something might be happening in that network to cause a pollution or to cause a spill. It will give us an early warning on whether or not there's a blockage forming, and the work that we're doing with the government to support their not flushing of wet wipes down the toilet and focusing on pee-poo and pee-poo and paper will also have a difference. So those are two things. The other thing is the significant investment. So we are investing earlier through a water fit strategy to improve the number of activations from our storm overflows, and we're bringing some of that spend forward. And I'm going to come to Mark now as our Director of Asset Management just to elaborate a little bit more on that, if I may.
Yeah. So yes, we've had a water fit programme running for a couple of years now, where we're targeting high spilling overflows and putting in investment or operational practices or changes in order to bring those spill numbers down. That is driven to 2025 in order to achieve the 20 spills on average across the region. It is a challenging programme. We've also got investment coming forward that's been agreed with the Secretary of State, and so there was an acceleration programme in Falmouth and Sidmouth where we're seeing investment starting, but we're now looking at the 283 overflows that we've set out in the next 5-year period from 2025 onwards, and we're looking at how do we bring those forward and start those earlier as well. So there's quite a number of different ways in which we're looking to accelerate that investment and start it earlier. And we don't need kind of approvals from the regulators to do that. We are just moving ahead and making that occur.
I can just have a follow-up to that. That was really clear and helpful. But can you give us any sense of the sort of magnitude of the investment that's being brought forward? Because even saying an average of 20 across the region, so I'm guessing that means each one on average will be 20 per year. That's still, to us, again, to a lay person, it sounds like quite a lot. So just but something about the scale of the investment.
Yeah, I mean, let's just talk about the scale of investment on storm overflows. So over the 15 years that we've talked about, we are looking at in the order of £3 billion to be spent on storm overflows to improve them and to meet the new government targets. I mean, that's a very considerable sum, much larger than any investment that we've ever seen going before. As a result of that, we've compartmentalised it into the 15-year period because that's just not affordable. And then we've really challenged ourselves about the affordability. So whilst we are going to be investing over £1 billion in storm overflows in the next 5-year period, we've actually only got about 750 million of that actually impacting customer bills. The rest we've driven through efficiency, we've driven through areas where we're going to fund that ourselves because not all of that should go on customer bills. So we've really challenged ourselves about that delivery and the balance. But even then, that's quite a considerable sum of money, and then that is having that impact on customer bills as we go forward. And that's being driven through the government targets that are in place and how do we achieve those within that time frame. So in terms of the early investment we're talking about, that's about 100 million that we're looking to bring forward.
Okay.
So
thanks for being context. So clear. I'd love to have a longer conversation, but there isn't time. So I'll certainly pass on to a colleague.
Mind switching off your microphone? Thank you.
Right. I'm from a very rural ward within West Devon, and looking at data from the River Trust, we've found that there's a large number of spills from the smaller sewage works into the local rivers and streams. Basically, what measures are you doing to reduce that? They're quite high in 2022.
Yes, we're very aware of those, and we are focusing on a lot of those inland sewage treatment works. They're typically what we call descriptive works, where they're regulated in a set way. We are exploring lots of different ways in which those spills can be reduced. Some of those are operational changes. Some of those are actually putting in additional stages of treatment so that the spill goes through typically a reed bed before it discharges to the environment. And then in other cases, we're putting additional storage in. So we're already looking, and under the water fit, we're already targeting all of those works. The other element is where we're getting a lot of groundwater coming in to those sewers. And then we're also looking at how do we rehabilitate and improve those sewers to prevent that groundwater going in through to the sewage treatment works. So we're getting a lot of inflow water, some of which is appropriate and some of which isn't appropriate, because we also see a lot of land drainage connections going into the foul network, and that's actually an illegal connection because sewers aren't there to drain land, they're there to drain properties, but they're not there to drain land. So we do find quite a lot of land connections and land drainage that's an illegal connection, and we're then going to be working about how do we remove those, and so they have a different pathway, because the foul sewer and mixing with foul sewage isn't the right solution.
I'll come back to you on that one. Within my own ward, we've had an instance where a developer has connected to your sewer a massive suds tank, which drains the whole site. I understood he got technical approval for it, but I don't know where the final approval comes from that, or how he manages to make that connection without final approval. How does that system work? That's surface water going into the foul sewer. It's a combined network.
Yep. A bit of history here. Back in 2011, there was the Floods and Water Management Act, and within that was Schedule 3, which was about should there be a SUDS authorising body, and that would then allow and authorise whether connections of things like SUDS into a foul sewer would occur or not. That never got enacted, and every government since 2011 hasn't enacted it either. It is now being looked at to be enacted, and I'll be really pleased when it does, because that then creates the authorities and the requirements for people to connect. We operate within our developer services a SUDS hierarchy, which is a completely separate SUDS that doesn't connect right the way through to things like an overflow from the SUDS that could connect into the foul connection. And we don't have the powers to enforce that. It's the planning authorities that have the powers to enforce that, but it isn't the water company. So we encourage as many developers as possible to go down the SUDS route and separate the surface water out, but it isn't something we can enforce. And at the end of the day, they have the right to a connection in the Act. They've got a right to a foul connection, but ultimately, if there is no other, and I think the words are economically viable solution, then they are allowed to connect surface water. It's not something we are pleased about, but we do not have the powers until Schedule 3 is enacted.
After this meeting, I'd love to have a further discussion on the subject with you.
Hello, thank you for your presentations, etc. Very interesting. My question was around, you've got these 4 strategic priorities for 25 to 30, and I'm really focusing on the water quality resilience and the overflows and pollutions. Having had an incident within Horrobridge, within my borough, within my ward, whereby you've got a road, major road was blocked for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, where they're trying to sort out a foul drain. And part of that was as a result of there was a bigger drain going into a smaller drain, which didn't help. And for me, it's the archaic nature of our system. Do you consider yourself a proactive or a reactive situation in terms of sort of dealing with some of our archaic infrastructure?
In terms of sewer cleaning, we have a proactive cleaning process which risk ranks all sewers within the region, and then we increase the cleansing frequency on those that are higher risk. So that is a proactive approach to try and reduce blockages. We also have, and we've touched on the kind of Love Your Loo campaigns, getting out, engaging with customers so that they don't use things like wet wipes. And there's a lot of conversations have been happening around that because of a bill going through Parliament, and DEFRA have been consulting on that. We would like to see all wet wipes ultimately banned, but ultimately, consumers like to use them. It's easier for them, but actually they need to be able to break up and they need to be able to break down quite quickly. Whereas a lot of those that are on the market and contain plastic fibres, they don't break down and they cause blockages. And we have over 7,000 blockages a year that are caused by wet wipes. So that is something that we really do want to see changed in legislation because actually it's leading to a lot of blockages, a lot of harm to the environment. And you know, there are many a panorama programme and so forth talking about Wet Wipe Island on the Thames, which is just made up constantly of new wet wipes. And you know, it's wrong. We need to change our views on society of how we use wet wipes and what they're there for. They can be used, they just shouldn't be disposed of down the toilet.
Okay, well, developing that theme, having read through the storm overflow and pollutions document you produced, I have a bit of concern over some of the figures that were published in that document, because on page 24 within that document, it states that in the last 30 years, £8 billion have been spent on enhancing wastewater infrastructures, etc. And then it goes on page 21, just prior to that, it talks about the fact you're talking about putting in just over 1.1, just under 1.1 billion pounds in the next 5 years in the infrastructure. And you yourself, Mark, quoted that you're bringing in £3 billion over the next 15 years. Now, for me, if I do the simple maths, and it is simple maths, we're talking about 8 billion over the next 15 years, whereas in the past 30 years, 6 billion, sorry, get it right. I must get it right, just to be fair. In the last 30 years, you spent 8 billion. You're saying in the next 15 years, it'd be 3 billion. So if we double that to 30 years, you're talking 6 billion. So in fact, based on those figures in your booklet, there is a suggestion that you're actually reducing investment compared to previous years.
Yep.
So, you know, one of the issues goes into, you know, around that. It's great bringing it forward, but if it's less money than was there before.
So 8 billion is what has been spent on average over the last 25 years. The 8 billion that we talk about going forward is over 25 years. Yep. And that's for all maintenance on the wastewater network, not just storm overflows.
Well, I'm just saying within the document,
storm overflow money alone is 3 billion.
Yeah, but within the document, it talks about 30 years being 8 billion. So, you know, 25, 50 years, it just seems to me, anybody reading that would get the impression there's actually less investment.
It's actually more. But maybe rather than try and work through all that detail, should we take that offline and I can walk you through that in more detail?
Okay, thank you.
Those are my numbers. I do.
Thank you. But it follows into the next question, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so sort of staying on the financial aspects of it, and you were very helpful earlier in explaining about how it was only 750 million that would be put onto customers' bills and that you yourselves would be investing a quarter. So it's sort of 3/4 on your customer base and 1/4. But clearly the other party here is your shareholders. And one of the things that I hear frequently from people is how concerned they are about privatisation and the fact that you're giving so much money out in dividends that really should be invested in the system. So if you could say a little bit more about how you decide what the level of dividends should be.
Right. Let's talk about what the dividends do first. So we've talked about that 2.8 billion that we're going to spend in the next 5 years. Only about 60% of that is recovered through customer bills in that same period. So the other 40% has to be borrowed. Yep. And just like any mortgage or anything that's associated with that, you have to pay interest on what you're borrowing. So that 40% is being borrowed, and we borrow that through 2 routes. One is that we go to the banks and we borrow, and that's debt. And then the other is equity, whereby we will go to the share market and we'll borrow on shares. So people who have made investments through shares, and let's be clear about who those people are. So a lot of the share ownership is with pension funds. It is with a number of different institutions, some of whom are international, some of whom are not, some are UK based. It's with individual customers, And our Water Share Plus scheme, for instance, is already, we've shared shares back, that's an awful phrase, back to customers, and 1 in 14 of our customers is actually a shareholder. So when we talk about dividends, we are returning a dividend to those customers where they would take that money and otherwise they would go and invest that in a bank and they'd get a return on it. So the dividends are actually paying a return to customers for lending the money. Now the dividend policy we're very open about it, and it's on the Pennon website, what the process is for that for that dividend policy to be set. And that is based upon our performance. There are rules in place with Ofwat, and so if we perform badly in terms of pollutions, for instance, then actually we are not allowed to give dividends around that. We have to return that money to customers. So the dividend policy is clearly set out on the website, on the Pennon website, and it talks through all these different factors that we have to take into account before we can set the dividend. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that South West Water is not the only company within Pennon, and Pennon has a number of businesses that are outside. And historically, if you go back at the dividends that have been paid, that included Viridor, who were a waste management company. And one of the things that people do get quite confused about is Viridor was sold a number of years ago, and there was a big return to customers and shareholders for that sale. And so a lot of the numbers, when you look historically, are all associated with that sale of Viridor. But actually, within the more recent years, the dividends have been lower, and they reflect just the South West Water operating company and the wider Pennon Group. But South West Water is the biggest component within.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's very clear and detailed. I think, the concern that people have is that usually when you talk about shares, there's a real element of risk in it, whereas, when you're providing a service like water, everybody needs water and there's less risk. So it's really helpful to understand about what your transparent framework is, and I'll go and look at that in more detail.
But that is the challenge for shares, is that, shares can go up as well as down. The share price hasn't been the world's best in the last few years. It has fallen.
Yeah.
And so, there is a risk there for people who are buying and buy shares.
Sure. Just briefly, I know you've outlined nearly everything we're going to quiz you on already, but looking at what everybody's concerned about climate change, I'd be interested if you could just flesh out a little bit how you are adapting your work output and your long-term planning, particularly to accommodate that change, which theoretically, with a bigger increased consumer base and different challenges, I'd just like to see the balance of how you're looking at that.
So we have 2 statutory frameworks that we have to use for planning, particularly over the longer term. One is the Water Resource Management Plan, which looks at our water resources, reservoirs, and things of that nature. And then it's the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan, which has just become a statutory requirement going forward. Both of them actually follow a very similar framework. They look at future growth in terms of population growth and things of that nature, and they look at the impacts of climate change within there. On the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan, we also monitor what is called urban creep, and that's the extent to which people are paving over their back gardens and creating more impermeable area that then runs off into the sewer network. And all of those things are projected over a 25-year period. We look at different levels of climate change, the extent to which it is going to follow the different scenarios that have been set out by the climate summits. And we appraise particularly things like how many properties would be flooded under different scenarios. And we have looked at a range of different scenarios on the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plans. And similarly, on the Water Resource Plan, we've looked at a different range of different scenarios of drought and so forth. So there's a lot of planning that goes involved in that. If I give you some numbers on the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan, we did over 88,000 hydraulic model runs looking at different scenarios and different climate change scenarios to look for what would impact individual properties, etc., from a sewer flooding perspective. And then we've reflected those into about 6 different scenarios that we expressed within our drainage and wastewater management plan. But you know, there's a vast amount of computational processing to start to look at all of those different climate change scenarios. But and that's an exercise we have to repeat every 5 years, and we'll be doing that again very shortly. So, yeah, ran quite quickly.
I think the other thing to say is what we're doing ourselves as a business. We are electrifying our fleet as well. So by 2030, our fleet will be hopefully fully electric, depending on the supply of batteries in the world, etc., etc. But as I mentioned earlier on, we're also looking at green first rather than grey first solutions. So we do a lot of catchment management work, particularly in sensitive areas. You've probably seen, maybe not here, but a picture of a pipe issuing onto the beach at Trevornance Cove in St Agnes. Now, we've got automatic water quality monitors there, and we know that that isn't sewage, because sewage isn't brown, it's grey. It's coming from the way that the catchment is managed. There will be an element of sewage in there when our storm overflows do operate, but we're looking at how can we use catchment management to slow the flow, to change the land use, to put in riparian buffer strips, to improve the habitat, to plant trees, to build ponds. So there's a lot of green solutions that actually make sense for us to do, because A, they're more sustainable, and B, they possibly are cheaper than the grey solutions in some circumstances. So that map that I showed you is the beginning of some of the green solutions that we're putting in place as well to combat that.
Thank you very much. I think, do you mind, Steve?
Yeah, do we need to carry on?
Well, I just think we're whizzing through the time, and Clarissa's looking like she wants to answer some questions, and I know some people have done some work. So perhaps we could. Has anybody got any questions for Clarissa?
Right, thank you for your answer to my question with regard to the funding challenges, and are you able to work with sorry, I'll start again. So biggest issue for me is, having heard a lot about the funding challenges the EA have faced and potential cuts you've faced, and just query about the impact it's having on your operational capabilities, and are you confident that you will be able to have an active role in implementation, in helping implement the plans for South West Water? And just as an aside to that, based on your answer to in your presentation about what you've got to do this, your 24 office staff, I'm afraid my underlying thought was the answer is no, you haven't got enough. But you were very polite in how you put it.
Yeah, I'm good at that. I have got a slide actually that shows how the money comes in to the Environment Agency. I can't remember which number it is, probably a few down. There we go. Oh. That's it. So this splits the money out, so you can see what comes in from our fees and charges. So that's what we're charging to have a permit with the Environment Agency. Then you've got the grant in aid, which is what comes from the government to support our work. And then there's the money that comes for flood and coastal erosion risk management. So you can see the kind of flooding side is the really big bulk that comes in to us. The grant and aid from the government has really reduced over the years that I've been working for the Environment Agency, and that is why we're very keen through this water transformation that I mentioned, that the government reviews how much permit holders are paying for their permit fees, and they are focusing on that for the water companies. So I sincerely hope that that does enable us to have the plan that I was talking about, where we have teams and officers that are focused on regulating the water company, because there's a whole kind of science and experience that goes with that, whereas at the moment the environment officers one day will be going to a sewage treatment works, the next to a farm, and then the next to a quarry. So taking a more kind of sector-based regulation stance is definitely the future of the Environment Agency and how we're going forward. You're right. We are constantly prioritising where we need to be and what we need to be doing, and but we have a lot of duty placed on us on what we must be doing too. And sometimes that duty-bound work conflicts with kind of environmental priorities. So we're just constantly doing that every week, looking at where those priorities are and getting people to where is needed. I think it's really important though to bring in that kind of industry wanting to comply and it not being publicly acceptable to not be abiding by your permit. And I think that's where this public interest is really helpful. I think we have got different categorisations of incidents. So you've got category 1, which is very, very serious, lots of public interest. You'll have a 2 where you could be having damage to fish and invertebrates living in the river. And then you have a 3, which is a low impact event. And we don't attend those low impact events. And I know that my officers would love to be able to attend those, but that does require significantly more investment. But in order to safeguard the environment properly, that is what you need so that we truly can understand what's going on out there. And that's where we're really dependent on the public using the 0800 numbers to give us evidence of what's going on. And the public are great. We get videos and photos of things going on all the time, which we do use.
Just to comment on that, I understand. Sorry, you need to just turn yours off, Clarissa.
Sorry.
If you could turn yours off, thank you. I understand that low-level category 3 isn't on the big scale of things. However, I know a number of people that do swim in rivers in the area. The River Meavy in my ward is one of the most polluted rivers in the area, and it only goes from the bottom of Burrator Reservoir into the River Plym. It's not the longest of rivers, and don't want to get into detail of that, but my concern is, yes, that's small scale compared to everything, but if you're actually swimming in that river, if you're the one getting that jiffy tummy or ending up in hospital worse, then obviously it is a major impact on that. So that would be my only comment, and I hope you do get the resources to allow that to happen.
Thank you. And we have just in the last 12 months recruited a new batch of environment officers who have now got 12 months of training behind them. Through that kind of prioritising that I'm talking about, we are considering revisiting some category 3 incidents where it's ticking, the right impact boxes, like the locations that you've just explained.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Clarissa? Excellent, man.
Yeah, hi. Just following on the question about the river, the presentation you mentioned several incidents that happened in my ward, which is in Tavistock, and the River Tavy being kind of actually having a category 1, I think you said, or in 2020 having quite an important spill. And I guess I wanted to follow up with the question around bathing waters as well. Is there, any way for us to document the types of bathing that happen within this area, which are wild swimming and not necessarily what you could consider as part of the beach swimming? Because I did look into this, and it does seem like it's quite a difficult thing to achieve, even though we know on the ground, as Councillor West mentioned, that there's a lot of people now using our waters, and because they are considered kind of clean and coming from the moor, but from what we've just heard, they could be actually not as clean. And there's a lot of water sports enthusiasts as well who use the River Tavy for canoeing and things like that. And I just wondered how hard it is and whether it could be made any easier to get bathing water status on rivers like that.
So there is, I think on the Dart, they are looking to make a bathing water area, so that's not a beach. I think one of the issues with this is, so you've got catchments that drain to bathing waters, and they will then hit some priority kind of triggers. The more bathing water or areas that we have, the more you have to do that kind of priority exercise that I was mentioning. So if we put another one off, that takes work off somewhere else. So it's not straightforward, but it's developing, and I should imagine when we're sitting here in 10 years' time, there will be much more river locations that are identified as bathing waters that will then trigger those parameters and tightening up of things that you're after. I think Alan wanted to come in on that.
Yeah. So we recognise the need and the desire for people on inland bathing areas and to want to go through that process. We set a pilot off 2 years ago on the Dart and Tavy and have been doing lots of water quality sampling, real-time monitors in the rivers to understand what is going on. And that has resulted in 4 applications going in on the DART, and those applications are currently being considered by the Minister and DEFRA. We're due to get the outcome on those in March. They've been submitted by the Friends of the DART group, and when one of those becomes an inland bathing water and it will be designated as such then, we have then different standards that we have to achieve. So at the moment, if it's not an inland bathing water, then we to achieve a target for all overflows of 10 spills on average over a 10-year period. If it gets classified as an inland bathing water, we then have a target of 1 spill on average over a 10-year period. So it drives it towards a different standard of improvement, and that will then actually reduce the incident because that has then become a designated inland bathing water. So, but to get that, there's quite a significant process. We've been using a system called Hello Lamppost along the DART, and if you go for a walk up and down there, you'll see these signs that are up. If you click on the QR code, you can then interact with giving data about what you're doing and the recreational use you're using on the river. And that has been really helpful with Friends of the DART to give them an idea of which sections of the DART are using and being used most. We have to provide evidence to DEFRA that I think you've got to achieve 150 people bathing at any one moment in time in order to justify it becoming an inland bathing water. So it's quite a high target, but we've used this technology to help gather that data and then support the applications.
Okay, we're more or less up to an hour. I think our leader would like to say a few words.
I do have a question, and I've listened in my office to what's been going on, and I haven't heard a question on this. Where I live in Tavistock, we have the Water Board turning up on a regular basis for nearly 2 years now, saying that we have the largest leak in Tavistock. We've all signed the papers that you can come into gardens, etc. 2 years on, this work isn't being done, and you say it's losing, I think, 55,000 litres a minute, which is a pretty large leak, and I think those are the figures. You started coming round in the summer of 2022, and nothing has been done about this leak yet. It's ruined part of our garden, and it's just like, when do you consider how many leaks like that are in the area that you're doing nothing about?
I'm not aware of the situation, sorry. We'll have to take that away. If we can make a note of it and take it away, because it would be foolish of me to answer something that I don't know the answer to. We take that away.
You don't answer any questions on leakages?
Yeah, we do. I'm not aware of that particular issue.
I was just asking is what is your response rate to water leaks that are said to be substantial?
So we have a... Do you want to go, Mark?
Yeah, we have a policy of where leaks are visible that we will get to them and repair them within 48 hours. So I'm slightly surprised by what you're saying, because clearly that doesn't meet that criteria, does it? But the guy who is managing the leakage sits about 4 or 5 desks away from me. I'll go and have a chat with him tomorrow and get back to you specifically about what's
Okay, thank you very much.
Make a note of that in the notes so that we got a formal record so that we can pick that one up. Thank you.
I think we're going to have to finish. Has the committee got any requests, reference follow-up or future actions? Yeah.
You know, I came in late because of traffic and I had a meeting in Plymouth for my business, but I think this has been really insightful. We've been catching the end. And, you know, I was thinking about how your organisation remain agile over the next few years as you implement this. You know, people have to provide for the existing customers, but also, you know, implement these huge targets that are really needed. I don't know if these meetings could become regular or if you could email us with a yearly update on how on target you are to achieving these goals, because they'll benefit people in the huge investment for people in the Southwest, which is amazing. And it would be like Nestle does it for certain targets they're reaching with women. They upload them publicly on their website, how close they are, and they achieve them on target. So it would be really good, whether it's an email or coming in, but just to let us know if that it's moving in this direction over 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we are committed to is the transparency around storm overflows and storm overflow performance. We launched the WaterFit Live system nearly a year ago now, and that has been looking at bathing water performance, etc. We are about to launch WaterFit Live Phase 2, which will include all overflows, including all of the inland ones, and that performance will be visible within the hour, and that will also set out details around what overflow are we going to improve and when, and then we'll be uploading performance improvements and also what are we actually delivering in the capital programme and when, and we'll hopefully get quite a bit in there in terms of what I'm calling storm overflow stories, where we can actually show you the improvements that have been made, and you should then be able to see the improvements in the associated overflows over time as well. So that's going to be a major step forward in terms of transparency, and every overflow will be visible and everybody can see every overflow.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So so people can see each overflow when you plan to fix it, so it could say 2035 on it or 2029, yep. Something like that. Will you be producing yearly reports, like PDF files that can be accessed on the website?
So we already produce a WaterFit year-on-year programme and discussion of what has been delivered. So if you go onto our website and look at the WaterFit programme, there are already, it's been running for 2 years. We have produced back in April a 1 year on document and talked about everything that had been delivered. We'll be doing it again in April this year.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, can we finish off? Is this the feedback?
Yeah, this is just, I would actually like to see you back here again in 6 months in some respects. I would like, Mark, you talked about you can give me a breakdown of the figures we've discussed. I'd probably like you to come back and talk to that if possible, if that's agreeable to the committee. And I think there's probably 1 or 2 other things coming out of this that colleagues would like to sort of have another chance to talk to you and discuss with you on that, if that's possible.
Could I just ask whether or not that this is the appropriate place, or we have a small working group where we could get together to talk in a bit more detail? Because I feel an hour is constraining conversations, and I wonder whether or not it might be better if we get the right people in the room. And I can't comment on a 6 monthly because we'll have a number of other, Mark and I will need to travel around the rest of our region, so it is quite a resource intensive thing. But I just wonder whether or not we replace this conversation with a working group chair, just a suggestion where we can have a little bit more time and look over documents, because it's quite difficult sometimes when I report on page 49 and you haven't got page 49 in front of you, or vice versa. So just a suggestion, Chair.
What does committee think about that approach? Yeah.
Happy with that.
Okay then. So we can take that forward if that's all right with you.
If I could just make one comment. One of the things we're looking for as we roll out this programme over 15 years is, and Alan said it, we're looking to do more nature-based solutions, more SUDs, more things of that nature within the catchments. And what we need to work with yourselves about where those green solutions will be, what's the most appropriate piece. Now, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to go, here's a big cash contribution to that, but what you might be able to say is, here's this green bit of land where we think you could put one of those in place, and then could we work together about how we develop those solutions and put those in place. And that really does require working together to look for these alternative pathways, particularly when we're separating out surface water. So yeah, we would really like to work with you on a scheme-by-scheme basis through that detail.
I know a councillor that will bite your hand. I know a councillor who will bite your hand off, who isn't here unfortunately today because she's on a train into London. So that would be good for her to be involved in that as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we need to move on to the next item, but thank you very much, Clarissa, Mark, and Alan. Hope you have a good journey back. Yeah, thank you for your time. Are we all right to carry on? All feeling lively? So now we're going to be looking at item 7, which is the draft revenue and capital budget proposals. Ms. Buckle and Councillor Edmonds? Is that right? Yeah, well, I'm happy to see all of you up here. Are you going to do a short presentation or introduction? Yeah.
Just a brief intro.
Yeah, please. Members, a draft budget report was presented to the Hub Committee in November 23, showing a budget gap at that date of £142,000. That, of course, was in the very early stages of the budget setting process. In December 23, the government announced the draft local government finance settlement, which has enabled Mrs. Buckle to make proposed changes to the November draft budget. And the result is a proposed balanced budget for 24-25, which is before you today for consideration, before going back to Hub on the 30th of January, and finally to full council in February for approval. I think at that point, I'll hand you over to Lisa, who will talk you through the proposed budget changes. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Thank you, Chairman. Today's report is setting out the draft revenue and capital budget proposals for next year, 2024-25. There are a series of recommendations there which for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to consider today, to recommend on to the Hub Committee, and then the budget proposals will then go before Council in February. That's actually on the 20th of February, so that's when the formal decisions around the budget will be taken. Chairman, I propose to go through sort of section by section, and perhaps we could take sections after section 1, section 2, and so on, so that we can consider each of the items such as council tax, business rates, new homes bonus, some of the assumptions that have been used within the financial modelling on a section by section for the report. So in section 1, the executive summary, there is a bit there that I'd just like to point out, and that's in section 1.2. If we go back to the financial year 2009-2010, we were actually receiving £3 million in core government funding. And that is called revenue support grants. So when you hear ministers speak about core government funding for local authorities, they will use the term RSG or revenue support grant. So we used to receive £3 million per annum, and that has been reduced almost to nil. So in next financial year, it is predicted that we will receive just over £94,000. So that's been a significant reduction in government funding, in that now really the council has to be self-sufficient. We have to fund ourselves because we're not getting any core government funding like we did back in 2009-2010. How have we coped with some of those reductions in government funding? Well, obviously members are aware that we have worked in partnership with South Hams District Council. That has allowed us to share all of our workforce with South Hams, and that has enabled the council to make significant savings of around £2.2 million per year, and more importantly, being able to protect all our statutory frontline services. And actually, if you look between the two councils, between West Devon and South Hams, we've actually achieved shared services savings of over £6 million per annum, so a significant amount in staff savings. The medium-term financial strategy, that sets out our budget strategy for the next 3 years. And in 1.8 of the report there, you can see what our predicted budget gaps are for 25-26 and 26-27. So if members agree the proposals before you today, we will have a balanced budget for next year, which is obviously a statutory requirement. We have to ensure that all of our net expenditure has been financed, our budget has been financed by the income that we will get in. And actually looking forward into 25-26, the budget gap just over 0.4 million. And then in 26-27, that's when the budget gap increases by a further 0.8 million. And the main reason for those budget gaps in 2 years' time is because that's when we think there will be significant local government reforms coming into place. So things like the fair funding review, the reset of the business rate baseline, all of those funding assumptions, we think we will be worse off when those funding reforms come into play. I attended a seminar yesterday, the Rural Services Network Group, and they were saying, you know, that they're not even convinced that those funding reforms will come in 26-27. That is the earliest they will come in, but they could very well be further delayed into 27-28. In 1.7 of the report there, I have set out the key assumptions that we are using for the budget proposals. So as we just said, we're assuming the business rate baseline reset gets deferred. And the reason that that is beneficial for us is what happens is you basically lose all of the business rate growth that we've had since 2013. So where we've been encouraging businesses to move into the West Devon area, where we've had economic regeneration, that growth basically gets taken away by government and they reset the baseline in a much higher amount. So basically you have to start again and start growing your business rate base to get more income in from business rates. So the longer that baseline reset gets deferred, the better it is for us as a district council. So if that is deferred into 27-28, that would be good news for us. There is something called negative revenue support grant, and I will just explain what that is. So we were saying that we don't get any core government funding anymore. So basically our revenue support grant is near zero. And what negative revenue support grant is that in the future, if government wish to further reduce the funding to councils, because we're practically at zero as it is, our further reductions would take us into negative territory. So we would get something called negative revenue support grant. And because we don't get any core government funding, the only place the government can take funding away from us is take some of our business rate income. So some of our business rate income we would have to pay back to government in the form of negative revenue support grant. Now, the government have very helpfully said that's not going to be introduced for next year, so there will not be any negative revenue support grant. But within this modelling, we are assuming that that will happen in 2 years' time. So the modelling is a worst-case scenario, but we think that that could come in when the local government reforms come in. In terms of council tax limits, the government have confirmed that for next year, the limit for us as a district council would be the higher of 2.99% increase in council tax, or £5. And for us, the higher would be 2.99%, which would be an increase in the Bandy council tax of £7.59 per year. So currently, our share of the council tax bill is £254 for a Band D. That would, 2.99% increase would increase that to £261.59. And I've got a section on council tax that we can have a look at when we get to that part of the report. So very much what they're saying is that 24-25, next financial year, is what's called a rollover settlement. So really what the government are doing are basically no change in our funding, rolling over what we've had before, so no significant change in what we receive. And on the seminar that I attended yesterday, they very much assume that 25-26 will also be a rollover settlement. they don't think any new government or incoming government would have time to make any significant changes because they would have to consult on that. And with us being notified before Christmas, there wouldn't be time really to bring anything new in. So it is looking like 25-26 will be very similar to what we're receiving now and what we're predicting to 24-25. A business rate pooling game, we're modelling 200,000 from that. So this is where we are in a Devon business rate pool with the other district councils in Devon. So there are 8 districts. We all pool our business rates, along with Devon County Council, Torbay and Plymouth. So the 11 councils within Devon, we've been making pooling gains since 2013. For the next financial year, we think that pooling gain will be about £9.7 million. So that's a significant financial benefit to the Devon councils. And in terms of if we're gaining that amount of money, who's losing it? It's the Treasury that are basically not receiving that 9.7 and instead letting the councils retain that funding. And that's because they've, in the early days of localisation of business rates, they very much wanted to incentivise councils to work together in regions on economic regeneration and put some, basically what it means is we pay less of a levy in our business rates and we get to keep more of the business rates. So for us, we're predicting that to be 200,000 for next year. So, you know, not an insignificant amount of money for being able to stay in the business rate pool. We're also assuming that we will make a council tax surplus next year. So this is where we achieve more than our target collection rate. We did very well in collecting both business rates and council tax last year. We were actually in the top quartile nationally. And in terms of council tax, we achieved a collection rate of 98.34%. And we did well on business rates as well. It's helpful that the government have confirmed that Rural Services Delivery Grant will continue for next year. So that's just over £500,000. And we provided a lot of evidence to government a few years ago about what it costs to collect waste in an area such as West Devon, where you've got very sparsely populated, lots of properties, very long distance in between them. And so we were part of the councils that lobbied for that extra funding to say actually it does cost more to deliver services in rural areas. And in terms of our modelling for pay increases, we're modelling that at 4% for next year, 24-25, and reducing our pay assumptions to 3% in the following 2 financial years. Over the page in 1.10, I've just done a bit of a reconciliation about how we've gone from the budget gap, which was reported to the Hub Committee in November. That budget gap was just over £142,000 to now where we are presenting a balanced budget. So there's a couple of things within that table in 1.10 of the report that I'll just pull out. We have put a cost pressure in for next year for business continuity and cyber security. So we think that is going to cost about £75,000. And that is our 50% of the total cost. So obviously we share that cost with South Hams. So that's the council's 50% towards that. We've also increased the amount we put aside for the reserve for our investment properties. So this is a recommendation that actually came forward from the Audit and Governance Committee when they considered a report on the investment properties. And that would increase our contribution from 10% of the annual rental income, and we actually get 1.1 million in from those 4 investment properties, to 15% for next year, with an aim of increasing that to 20% by the year after. So that's an additional cost of £55,000 for next year. We're also proposing to put an annual contribution into our vehicles replacement reserve of £300,000. So this is where we're putting money away for our future fleet replacement, particularly for our waste vehicles. So that we've further down the road, we've got summer money there to start replacing those vehicles in accordance with our forward plan. And we are recommending introducing a vacancy savings target for next year. So this is where at any one time, we've never got a sort of 100% complement of staff. There will be natural turnover and a natural time when sort of, particularly for some of our senior roles, if those successful candidates have to give 3 months' notice, there can be a period of time before actually the new person is in post. And actually, when you look at our revenue budget monitoring report, for the current financial year, we are predicting that we will make salary savings of about 250,000. So we're setting a vacancy savings target there of £80,000. We've put the same in for South Hams, so obviously we share a workforce. So we've put a vacancy savings target in of 1.5% in both councils. And actually, the share of the pay bill for West Devon is 5.4 million. And we think we'll get more income from treasury management investments, obviously with base rates remaining at 5.25. We're getting a good return on the council's cash investments, so we've put an extra 50,000 in for that. Happy to take questions, Chairman, on section 1 before we move forward. Thank you.
Councillor West.
Is it fair to say, Lisa, that in 26-27 we could have a perfect storm in terms of our budgets?
Yes, I think that's exactly right, Councillor West, definitely. And we have talked in the past, or many councils have talked about a business rates cliff edge, really. And that's what we are anticipating for 2 reasons. One, because if the government reset that business rate baseline, and obviously the baseline will go up, and we have to start again in terms of the growth. It means 2 things. Not only are we not getting as much business rate income in, we also probably wouldn't recommend that we are part of a business rate pool in the early years. And the reason for that is it's probably too risky. I mean, we would get the modelling done and see how it was looking. But if you're in a pool with much larger councils like Devon, Plymouth, Torbay, you've only got to get a big appeal, and that could have a financial impact on all of the councils within that pool. So in the early years, sometimes it doesn't make sense to pool, and then as you get more growth, that's when you can then enter the pool. So that pooling gain that we're making of 200,000, we wouldn't get in that financial year. So you're trying to cope with not having a pooling gain and also getting less business rate income. So we do call it a bit of a cliff edge. We would also expect the fair funding review would come in as well, meaning that negative revenue support grant comes in. So as you say, all of the things that affect us detrimentally would all come at the same time. What we would hope would be the case would be that the government would do some sort of what they call dampening, so that they would smooth in any significant decreases in funding over a period of years, rather than it all hitting the council in one financial year. That's what they've done in the past when they've done big local government reforms. But because we've got no modelling from the government to work on, we are assuming the worst case scenario. They would have to do some what they call exemplifications, whereby they say, you know, here are 5 or 6 different options, and they would ask councils to comment on which options are their preferred options. But they do that nationally, and quite often the problem is that things that may detrimentally affect rural councils or districts may favourably affect counties, unitaries, and then, you know, there's a bit of a choice about where does the money go. You know, there are big cost pressures in upper tier councils around social care, around children's services, and therefore it becomes an issue about priorities. And you know, the council has things like a housing crisis. you know, we can see our temporary accommodation costs are significantly increasing. We're not getting any additional government funding for that. But equally, when you've got very acute cost pressures in children's services, highways, and social care, it does become a difficult sort of balancing act.
Have we got a contingency plan?
Can I come in? Yeah. Now, so what Lisa didn't say is we've got the best Section 151 officer in the business. And had you been here 3 years ago, Councillor West, when we were sat in this committee discussing the budget, we'd have been saying that that cliff edge was this year. And so what Lisa is very prudent at basically saying this could happen. The reality is we know we're going to have a change of government of some form. They may have whatever priorities they have, which may kick some of this down the road. It may bring it forward and they may chop budgets massively. So what Lisa is doing here is predicting what could happen based on what we know today. But the fair funding review, Lisa's been telling me that that's going to happen every year for the last 5-6 years, and it hasn't happened yet. So a lot of this is sort of predicting a sort of crystal ball as to what may or may not happen. So I would say, and I don't know if Councillor Edmonds or the leader want to comment on that, but that's true, isn't it?
I was going to add, in this perfect storm would also be losing the new homes bonus, because we don't know what they're going to bring in for that either. But that said, and Lisa having said all she said, which is, as you know with Lisa, true and honest, etc., there's a lot of Section 114 notices being issued by councils who have hit that cliff edge, and some of them have toppled over. The thing is every council within the country, apart from Basingstoke, is having real financial issues in one way, shape, form or of another. You know, we have all the rural side of it. Cities have probably far more with children's services and adult services because they're in conurbations, etc. So it is something that is being talked about, you know, at the local government association. And I think the parties individually, from what I hear, are having to discuss it, because whoever comes into government after the election is going to face the turmoil of this cliff edge, because it's not just us. By next year, there'll be a whole load more, because, you know, our temporary housing budget, we've overspent by 250,000 this year already. And some councils are in the millions that it's cost them, that they don't have the money for. So between children's services, housing, well, not the crisis, the immigration housing crisis, between that and adult social care, they are the main three things that will send local authorities like us at our tier level, but also unitaries and county authorities over the edge. So whichever government comes in, whatever colour, that is going to have to almost be their first priority. And as Lisa correctly says, if the election's in October, there's absolutely nothing they can do for 24, 25. So along with what our figures look like for, you know, 25, 26 and 27, it could look 10 times worse. So we've just got to basically just go forward as we are, working on it all the time. And if there's things that we can't have, we can't have. Now, interestingly, I filled in a survey yesterday that was sent to leaders, and it was, what is missing? What is your relationship with national government, local government? What would you have that you can't have now? And actually, in the meeting at 4 o'clock for the hub members, Neil has managed to find some pennies for some of those things, like arts and, you know, people being able to do some smaller things that we can give some money towards again, because they mean a lot to us as members, that we would like to see some of those things. So when that report comes out to you, I suggest you all have a really good read, because it is of a way forward. And we are trying to maintain that. And we have to look in, particularly with the work Chris does, on the regeneration of how we can make money. I'm sure he must have a wand somewhere that he shares with Lisa. But that's fundamentally what we need, is for them to be able to find ways that we can make more money as an authority, because the government are not going to be dishing it out.
Very much. We have Councillor Southcott and Councillor Elliott.
In your budget there, you've got the waste charge, the garden waste charge. Last year we put it up considerably. Did it break even, make a loss, make a profit? What happened with it?
Yeah, well, we are expecting about 35,000 more in garden waste income compared to the budget. Our budget is just over, well, it's 305,000. And then, as at the end of March, we're predicting to have overachieved that by about 35,000. So slightly more than the budget. Yeah, about 10%.
Good. Okay. Can I just clarify at the same time our costs from FCC to operate the service also increase? So yes, we made more money than we predicted, but the money is back into the service to pay for it.
Does that leave us with any profit at the end of the day or not?
No.
Does it make us in a loss?
I would be recommending to members that they increase the charge this year.
That's what I thought you were going to say. Right.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Well, thank you very much for a very clear report. It's obviously very detailed, and I just wanted to sort of step back and ask a bigger sort of level question and then get into one little bit of detail. So, I mean, obviously when the hub met initially and then we voted on it in council, housing was something that we really wanted to have as a top priority. So I'm assuming, it's a bit hard as a newish councillor to understand all this, but I'm assuming that the 55,000 extra on the stepped increase of another 5% to contribution of maintenance management and risk management reserves for investment properties, that in a way could be seen as a housing budget. But I wasn't absolutely sure about that. And I suppose I'm just saying, can we be even more ambitious, given we've said that housing is a priority, is not taking away from all the work you've done, but is there any way that we can find extra savings that can then be channeled into housing and improving our housing provision, given it's such an emergency across West Devon?
So what you won't see in this report yet, and that's because it's coming to the hub committee at the end of January, is the council plan, which will set out all of the corporate priorities, such as housing, such as climate change, and as the leader said, the amount of resources that we can put to each of those priorities. So when the report comes to the hub committee, this report, which is really sort of the base budget, if you like, will have all of that extra detail on top around the delivery plan, setting it out theme by theme about the amount of money that can go in as investment, not only from the revenue budget, but also from capital projects. So that will be explained in there. For example, just before Christmas, members approved the project around 20 Plymouth Road, housing capital project. So you will see that detail coming through. So when members get this report at council in February, all that extra detail around the council plan will be there as well.
Okay, that really helps to clarify. So can I just ask a sort of detailed question about the amount of money that would be saved on salaries? So I'm assuming that in line with most public sector bodies that there's around about a 5% turnover of staff a year. Is that broadly right?
Yeah, our turnover is pretty much normal sort of rates of turnover. I'd say we're pretty much in the middle,
Yeah, so I'm just sort of thinking about this, that although in a way that seems like a saving for free, but I suppose I'd also, and I don't know which committee would look at this, challenge us that we are going to need to change sort of staff skill sets gradually over time. Things are really moving in the sort of digital AI field, all sorts of things happening. And just to be an agile organisation, sometimes it's really useful to make proleptic appointments rather than sort of stagnating and waiting for people to leave before you then make sense. So it almost seems to me the wrong way round to be saying, oh, we can save money by knowing that staff will cover for each other because so-and-so's left and we won't replace them for 6 months. A much more ambitious thing is to say, actually, we're going to make some exciting new appointments, and we know that because there's turnover, we can afford it. I'm sounding like a chief executive rather than a member. Good question.
But... so there isn't a committee that looks at that. I mean, that is almost operational detail. But for example, we know that the new council community is a key part of working with the community, helping the community help themselves. So within the existing budgets, we have looked at resources and said, okay, Neil Hawke, you go and recruit a community development manager. That person is starting next week. So because we've done that within our existing resource budgets, we've not had to come to members to ask for approval. We've, in the last 12 months, created a economic development team when we had nothing before. So, and I think we did come back and ask for some money for one of those posts. So where we're creating additional posts to meet what we see as a new challenge on demand, we would bring a report back to council to say, this is going to cost X, but generally what we try and do is to do that within the existing budget. So it might be a vacancy pops up here, we don't fill that with a like for like, we look at whether we can be more efficient in that service area, we use that money to fund something else, and that's what we do all the time. So that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow on really with what's already been said, that given that we may be barely meeting our statutory duties in the future financially, how can we stop the financial burden falling onto our local population through local taxation? Because we already struggle with the idea that we have to raise the council tax by the maximum every year, and I feel that it's a very unfair way to proceed. Thank you.
Councillor Ewings?
Yeah, I think that's more of a political question than an officer question. That is what I felt from the look that Mr. Molyneux was giving me. I think it is a political question, Councillor Daniel, and it is something that within the 31 cohort that we have to decide on. You know, we can work with our officers, but our officers only do as we ask. And I think that's where that comes in. You take a huge risk if you don't put it up 1 year and things really change. And there's a couple of councils within Devon that are struggling. It might not be Devon, I think it's North Somerset, where they didn't put up their share of the council tax. They cannot catch up to where they should be. And it's really affecting what they can deliver for their residents. So it's very difficult when, for example, Mrs. Smith lives somewhere, she doesn't have any street lights, the police don't come by, she has no children in education and things like that. And, you know, why should she pay that section of her council tax? Because she doesn't use it. And it is one of those things that's taxation in this country, that we all have to be taxed for all of those services, whether we use them or whether we don't. And I know, I think it was Jenny saying, Jenny Hotchkiss was saying that she gets letters like that, and I'm sure Lorraine did when she was doing it, from people who say, but I don't use those bits of the service. Unfortunately, under the law of this country, you still have to pay for it. And this is deemed the fairest way. It may not feel fair. We could well have a discussion as to whether, you know, what we do about this 2.99 if we don't accept it. But if we don't accept it, where else are you going to find the costs that you're going to have to spend as statutory duty when you've got no money because you're not going to put it up? And that leaves you politically in a very dark place. But it also will do nothing for officer morale, because we're doing nothing, and they know that we're not going to help ourselves to the best way that we possibly can help ourselves. We've chosen to ignore it. So we could then end up losing more staff because they feel that we're, you know, a bit dim and dismal. and they want to go somewhere that's a bit more with it and keeping in touch. So it's a very difficult conundrum, Councillor Daniel, that we can talk about, and I'm more than happy that the council talks about it. We might be able to iron it out within our own group before it comes to a full council. But I think it is something that is a very, very difficult topic to find that residue of money that putting the council tax up attracts.
Is there more that we can do to engage our MPs in this debate, you know, as they are supposed to represent us in Parliament?
Personally, I would say there's not a lot of point, and that's with either of the MPs, because to them it's what a government sets out that you've got to do, and you just do it, otherwise you don't get the money. And if you don't get the money, you will never make it up again. We have this debate at Town Council every year, don't we, Anne? That if we don't do it, and Chris wants to say something.
Well, didn't mean to cut across you, Leader, but you know, is government the answer? The money that comes from government comes from the taxpayer. So it's the same source. For me, if councils wish to change their business model, then it has to be that. I think we've started to do in terms of becoming more commercial in our outlook. That surely is the only alternative to the business model that we operate or have operated for many years, and we've found that coming under increasing strain, as Lisa correctly outlined, in terms of the reduction in the central government grant to virtually zero. We've had to become more commercial in our outlook to try and replace some of that income without having to start cutting our frontline services. We've managed to achieve that to date, but it's a huge challenge and a very big and important conversation. But I think the answer lies within. I think it lies within discussion with the 31 members to try and find ways of generating income so that the council tax bill doesn't always fall on the council taxpayer, or a reduction in cost if that's possible. So for me, it becomes a very commercial project. That's the only alternative that I can see outside of the existing local government model.
Thank you very much. I think we have, we're on section 1 of 9, aren't we, Lisa?
Yes, we are, Chairman.
Yeah.
But I think we've covered many of the other items.
There's a few of us that are going to have to go for a meeting at 4 o'clock, which is doing the action plan to go with hub papers. So we do need to get going again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point that I can add as well is that the work that has been done by Rural Services Network that we've included in our consultation response to government around the finance settlement, from the modelling that they have done, they are saying that urban councils receive 37% more in government funding spending power per head than rural councils. So when it does get to the fair funding reform, we need to make sure as a rural council that we very much make ourselves heard. We provide the evidence around the cost of our services to make sure that we are adequately funded, because even if the size of the cake stays the same, how the cake is divvied up between different tiers of councils, between rural and urban, will be quite important. And it's just making sure that we do provide evidence, which we've done in the past, around the cost of our services and running those services in rural areas. So moving forward on section 2, that just sets out, I think we've probably talked about those before, sets out the budget gaps and predicted budget gaps. As we said, 26-27, that is on a worst case scenario. And actually, if we went back a couple of years ago and looked at what we were predicting for 24-25, it would have been a very similar scenario. And as you get confirmation from government about things continuing or when they're going to bring in things like the baseline reset, we'll be able to firm our figures up for future years. In terms of the finance settlement, I'm sorry the table on page 14 hasn't come out, but that showed our core spending power, which increased by 4.9%. And within there, the government do assume that councils will increase their council tax by the maximum that has been allowed within the referendum criteria, which would be 2.99% for us. Still a below inflation increase, with inflation currently sitting just under 4%. But in the past, even if you go back to September, which is in the document here, I mean, September consumer price index was 6.7%. And you can see that we're not getting any extra government funding for those inflationary cost pressures. So in terms of council tax on page 15, if we did increase council tax by 2.99%, that would be an increase of £7.59 for the year, which is under 15 pence per week. That decision will be taken at council on the 20th of February. And 2.99% increase in council tax, that would generate an extra 165,000 for the Borough Council. And that's not only for next year, obviously that's for every year hence. And that 165,000 then is built into your base. And as the leader says, there at the bottom of page 15, you know, council tax is a form of general taxation. It's not actually a service charge. And those are two very different things. On page 3.8, I've just set out an average bill for the current year. So you can see there a Band E council tax paying just over £2,300. And the reason we always talk about a Band E household is Band E is basically the currency of council tax. So when the government look at the council tax levels up and down the country, they will always look at what a Band E council tax is. Same for the parish precepts. A Band E is calculated. And you can see there in 3.9, the referendum for the police next year is £13. So police will be allowed to put their share of the bill up by £13. 2.99% for us, 2.99% for the fire, and the upper tiers such as Devon County Council will be allowed to increase their council tax by 4.99%. And actually, because they are the largest share of the bill, the council tax bill, you can see that specifically influences how much overall the bill will increase by. And importantly, there are no referendum limits for town and parish councils. So if you're attending your town and parishes, we are asking for precepts in by the end of January. We do send out a little ready reckoner for towns and parishes about. It's not only taking into account the precept, it's taking into account your tax base. How many properties have you got to divide that precept over? So there are no referendum limits for towns and parishes for next year. I think we've talked about business rates. Our business rate collection for the last financial year was 98.95. So again, we were in the top quartile of all councils nationally in the collection of our business rates. Going forward, we've talked about the Devon business rate pool in 3.17 there. New homes bonus, we will get 449,000 for next year, and it is recommended that we spend 140,000 of that on capital projects and 309,000 funding our base budget. And I just want to touch on page 21. Members will be asked to vote again on the second homeowners council tax premium. We have 692 second home properties, and now that legislation has come into place, as part of the reports coming forward to HUB at the end of January and to council in February, that's when members will be asked to vote on charging an extra 100% council tax on second homes. I'm conscious of time, Chairman, so I'm happy to take any questions on the rest of the report.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important we ask questions if people have got them. Are there any questions? Councillor West?
Sorry, it seems to be a lot of me today. I do apologise. I must admit I was quite shocked looking at some of the parish precepts and the amount of percentage increase or even decrease in some reason. I know we can't influence that as such. Do they have to give specific reasons why there might be a big increase or a decrease at any one point, just out of interest?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Wessels. in terms of, I mean, obviously we are the billing authority, so they have to submit their precept to us. They don't have to give us as Borough Council any explanation for that, but obviously they have to agree their precept formally through a formal meeting, and they would have to put on their website in terms of that each town or parish council how they've calculated that precept and also the reasons for any increase in their precept. And any council, any sort of parish councils that have got a reduction in their tax base, so that means they've got slightly less properties than they had in the previous year to charge council tax over, we are making them aware that if they keep their precept the same, if the number of properties they've got to spread that over goes down, that the face of the council tax bill will show a council tax increase, even if they've kept their precept the same. So it's not just a calculation about what's the precept done, it's what's the precept done and what's the number of, what's happened to the tax base. Because we have had those queries coming through in the past, because the front of the council tax bill will always show what the percentage increase in a Band D council tax set by the parish is. So yes, I mean, as you say, for some of the bigger towns and parishes, so such as Tavistock, Oakhampton, we do, on our website, we put a list of all of their income and expenditure to show how that precept calculation has been made up. Yeah, there is accountability, yes, definitely.
Thank you very much. Do you need to be given a break so you can leave for your meeting? Okay, are there any other questions on those sections? Thank you, Lisa. Sorry.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I just say, and perhaps picking up on Councillor West's earlier question about, you know, looking at year 3, we have a significant budget shortfall. This isn't from the Section 151 officer, this is only a personal view. But if I look ahead to that year, that third year, I've just picked 3 items that may significantly change that position. That could happen. Business rates, negative RSG, that may or may not happen. That's 117,000. If we look at the contribution to the vehicle replacement, an options paper is coming to the Hub Committee at some point. Okay, at the moment it's in there as coming from revenue, but there could be options of leasing or borrowing for those vehicles. That could be 300. And Lisa's just made reference to the taxation, the change in taxation to second home properties. 600 and something properties, I think our share, 170,000. Add those 3 together, that takes a big chunk out of the 800,000 that we're looking at the moment. I'm not saying those things will happen, but it's an indication of what can happen between now and year 3. So there's always hopefully flexibility in there for the picture to change as we move along, but incredibly difficult to forecast ahead when the government only do a 1-year financial settlement. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds, for that.
Thank you very much. Do you want to continue, Lisa?
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to touch right at the very end on reserves. In Section 7, obviously, we're holding a healthy level of reserves, just over 10 million, 1.5 million in unearmarked and 8.9 million in earmarked reserves.
Sorry, Ms. Buckle, we got a question from Councillor Daniel.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's not a question, just to update you that the meeting at 4 o'clock is now 4:30. So we haven't got a
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that gives us a nice deadline. Would you like to carry on? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, as part of the report that will come forward to members in February, what I'm required to do as a Section 151 officer is do a risk assessment and sensitivity analysis about how robust are our budget estimates, how robust are our level of reserves. So again, you will see that come forward to members as part of the February report on the budget. We have got a couple of capital bids there in 8.4. We've got 90,000 to renew and upgrade the council's bank reconciliation software. and also recommending to start putting money aside for the provision of the roof here at Kilwivy Park. So it's recommended to put 50,000 aside annually for that. At the moment, our council's asset base, so if you look at our balance sheet at 31st of March, it's just over 38 million. And just in section 9 there, I've just touched on the report that we had from Grant Thornton, so that's our external auditors, who came to the Audit and Governance Committee on the 5th of December, and they gave commentary on the Council's arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and they also commented on our financial sustainability. And I'd just like to quote what they said in 9.5. They stated that West Devon Borough Council continues to perform well with regard to financial sustainability, with a record of stable financial and budgetary management, and that despite the challenging environment in which we've continued to operate, the councils maintain a good financial position and achieved a balanced budget, and they didn't identify any significant weaknesses in our arrangements. So I think that was a very pleasing report that we had from the external auditors, Grant Thornton, and that they are in the middle of auditing our current financial year's accounts, 22-23, and then obviously as we start to approach March, we'll be looking to close down the next set of accounts for 23-24. I'm happy to take any questions on that, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Ewing's got a comment.
I was just going to say, because I couldn't see it within here, Lisa, is that our greatest asset is that we use treasury management to the best possible way that we can. And Lisa's team are just amazing at it. It's my favourite pet subject to do with accounts. But it will have made us, I think you were saying, about 900,000 by the end of March, by the end of the year. That's 900,000 we wouldn't have if we didn't use treasury management as effectively as we do. We are expecting to hold several million for a project as it goes forward. We can invest that money and we can use the interest, and, you know, that our team look at doing that whenever we're holding money, whether it's for us or someone else. Treasury management is the answer. For those of you that did the training, you will know that you can put money into the money markets for a day if you want to. You can do it for a week, a month, whatever. Several days, well, not even years, because it's not worth it. And we don't get involved with Icelandic banks. We only use the list that is stated for use. But it is our saving grace, isn't it?
Thank you.
Very much, Leader, yes. And in this financial year, we do predict that we will achieve over 1.1 million. And we've had some news that actually for the Oakhampton Railway Station, we are going to receive some government funding up front that we can invest for that project as well. So that will also help our treasury management position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Okay, so we've got, do we look at recommendations now? Yeah, so we've got, I don't know whether it's 5 or 1.4 recommendations. Yeah, 7. Yes. So have we all had a look at the recommendations? So this report is seeking our views on the recommendations. So what are your views?
I would perhaps rephrase it out. Is the committee happy to recommend this report to go forward to Hub Committee? Yeah. There you go.
Thank you for your help. Are we happy to recommend it goes forward? Yeah. Is everybody happy? Yeah. Thank you very much. Is that finished, that item?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next one's performance indicators, I think. Yeah. Thank you very much, Lisa. It was a very interesting discussion and very interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I'd like to be a bit stricter on timing for this, if Mr. Hawke doesn't mind. So, can we be finished this within half an hour, please? Is somebody helping you with this, Mr. Hawke, or are you on your own? Yeah. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. This is the latest performance update as at the end of November 2023. The previous update was considered by this committee in July 23. If we can go to page 45 of Appendix A, please, Mr. Hawke. I think we can look at the performance on a page. We'll just get to that spot.
No, that's right. No, you're not.
There we go. I just thought it'd be easier if we could kind of share this on one screen. So this is the council performance on a page. And as you can see, we're looking at mainly smiley faces, which is always a good thing. However, we do have a few areas that are approaching target. And I think it might be helpful if we focus on those areas, perhaps rather than going through every service area. Those that are on track or ahead of target, we'll welcome any questions, if there are any, but I think it would be the right thing to do to focus on the ones that are perhaps just below target. The first of those areas is the freedom of information requests, which Neil will skillfully move to now, and I can't read that. Perhaps, Neil, can you just summarise that one for us, please?
I can. Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. So, yes, as Councillor Edmonds says, the first one that's slightly off track is the percentage of freedom of information requests handled within timescales. So, members will note from the commentary that during the period, 62 requests were received in November and 52 were responded to on time. So, we are seeing an improvement in performance, but it's one of the measures we are proposing to review. So we will be looking to review that KPI as we move forward, just to make sure that it's still relevant in the future. But we're not far off of the ICO target of 90% of requests completed on time, and we are continuing to prioritise those requests from residents and local businesses over those requests from national organisations. Clearly, we should be meeting 90% across the board, but I think it's important that we prioritise those from local residents and businesses.
Yeah, so where it says October, that should be November, okay? So, thank you, Neil. We are going to, it is our intention to review some of these KPIs, as Neil has alluded to there. There will be others as we go through that we think we can perhaps reconsider. The idea is that we'll involve lead members in that discussion to make sure that the KPI are aligned with the new corporate strategy, the council plan. So that is something that we'll be doing before the start of the new financial year and the launch of the council plan. FOI being one of those KPI under review. So where do we go from here? I think it's is it number of missed bins per 100,000? slight glitch there, and I think that was mainly down to an issue with one or two of the lorries, possibly, Neil. We had some technical issues which resulted in a drop-off.
That's what Mr. Molyneux can comment on that one, given that's his service area. Yeah, so my face would be slightly grumpy on this one, but it's getting grumpier month by month. So in October, the FCC had a multiple breakdown, so they had multiple wagons off the road at once. So normally they would have extra vehicles for each type of vehicle, so that if they have a vehicle breakdown, they can bring the reserve vehicle out and carry on. And what happened was, I think they had about 3 breakdowns all at the same time. So as a result of that, there was no way they could avoid missing bins, and I think it was a 2 or 3 day duration in terms of getting them repaired. So as a result of that, they couldn't then go back and collect the bins within the 48-hour period. So that was October. November was slightly above target, but not massively alarming. However, December, I've already been told, is also slightly above target, and January is also looking like it might be slightly above target. So we will be calling FCC into the office to talk about what are they doing about getting back to target. So it's slightly grumpy, but potentially getting a bit grumpier.
Thank you, Mr. Molyneux. Can I just say we will take questions on each of these areas that we're reviewing now at the end of the presentation. So I think the next one is the revs and bends calls answered in 8 minutes, unless my slides are out of order. Again, these I think are very complicated calls. So yeah, perhaps Mr. Molyneux, you've probably got a view on this one as well.
I do. This is a proper grumpy face for this one. Really, really disappointed with this, members. We've reorganised the service so that the revenues and benefits team take their own calls. And what we did was we phased the normal contact centre out of that, so it was just the team taking the calls. And for the first couple of months, that was a big improvement. Bearing in mind, we were sort of running at pretty low performance back in sort of the summer, and we made a massive difference, and then it slipped back again. I've now got the team providing me weekly monitoring in terms of performance to make sure that that performance gets back up to the level it needs to be. And we've got myself and Mrs. Hodgkiss, who runs the service, holding the team to account to make sure that we're managing it much more dynamically.
Okay. If you want to ask questions on these specific things as we go through them, then feel free to do so. You have a question, Councillor Elliott?
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, just comparing those two, it seems to me we should be a lot more grumpy about the revs and benefits calls than the number of missed bins. Because although the number of missed bins is above target, we need to be really focused on the numbers here, and it's only 8 bins more than the target, and we're talking about 88 bins out of 100,000. So the actual material, I mean, clearly we need to keep FCC on their toes, and we can't see it drifting off. But I think sometimes these graphs, because they're scaled, it can look like a bigger problem than it is when you take a step back. So that would be...
Hence my slightly grumpy to really grumpy comment. Yeah.
Inevitably, I'll just reflect that. Obviously, you know, to those people needing those benefits and everything else, that's a little bit different about bins not being picked up. But just out of interest, Steve, in terms of the, were people kept informed that their bins were being delayed? Because I know before now that there's been communication on Facebook or on the council website to say this has happened, i.e. we've had 3 multiple breakdowns, therefore there will be a possible issue about service. Did that happen in this instance, just to inform people so they don't get grumpy?
I don't know. I'll have to find out. I don't know. Normally you would expect that,
yeah,
but I don't know if that happened in October.
Just to say, as a councillor, we had a bit of a crisis with bin collections in the last term. That was very unpleasant. So yeah, Thank you.
Chair, if I may, there's just one final area, and that's the total number of calls. November was, as you can see, 2392, and that is very much in line with the previous year's figure. So not a huge change, but that's the number of calls going into the contact centre during the month, which is roughly the same as the previous year for that month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So are there any questions on any further questions on the areas that we've looked at? Please.
Councillor Saxby.
Just wondering for the freedom of information request. I'm still new. My immediate thought is, what are the timescales? How do we measure the importance of a freedom of information request? How do people access the data? Like, could we be using, I'm not saying we need to use some incredible AI technology, like it can be made very cheaply by someone on Upwork or Fiverr, but could we implement some sort of, could we reuse ChatGPT-4, turn it into a bot, and then get it to flick through data? So I'm just wondering, why is there a short, it's only 6%, but if 90% is set, then we can achieve that. So I'm just wondering, are there small minor tweaks, that continuous improvement we could make to hit that 90%? And if not, I totally understand.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. I think you're absolutely right. There are small minor tweaks we can make to further improve performance, and our information governance lead is working with departments to support them with that. It's difficult in terms of automating those responses, purely because the range of requests we could get and the various systems we've got and how we hold the data, and many of the requests, are very different. So we can get a request this month that says, can you tell me the turnover of staff in April? And then next month we could get the request from somebody totally different, asking for the same information but for a different month or for a particular week. So it's very difficult for us to be able to automate that. But we are doing all we can to really simplify it and publish as much as we can. So the team are monitoring the requests that come through and then supporting departments to publish as much as we can, make it available, and then it's very easy for us to go back to a requester and say, it's already on the web, go and have a look.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions on the smiley faces areas of the report?
Councillor West.
Sorry, we missed one. The average temporary accommodation used per month is down, slightly grumpy face. Sorry, Chris, there's been a lot going on. I mean, I've read the commentary about that. I mean, hopefully then, the accommodation we're putting in place with regard to the 3 flats, so that will help with this situation. Is that a fair comment, Neil, Chris, Councillor Edmonds?
I would say that is a fair comment, but we've got Isabel Blake here, hopefully she's still behind me, Head of Housing, who can just give you a quick run through of this one if you like.
Yes, thank you for your question. Temporary accommodation is on the rise. As of today, we've got 25 in temporary accommodation, which is more than the average in November of 16.8. We are in a time of cold weather, so we've got emergency provision for rough sleepers or people at risk of rough sleeping. And the breakdown of the guys that we've got in at the moment are 5 families and 20 singles, 3 of which are there under the cold weather provision. So it is unfortunately increasing. It is kind of seasonal temporary accommodation use. We do see an increase this time of year. The 3 flats that you're talking about at 20 Plymouth Road and Lisa was talking about earlier, that will make a difference. That will make a saving on our temporary accommodation spend, as well as getting people out of very expensive pay-per nightly bed and breakfast. As well as that, we've got a property adjacent to our building at Spring Hill that's coming forward as another unit of temporary accommodation. We've also used some of our funding to purchase 8 properties through the Local Authority Housing Fund. So all of this is us moving in the right direction to get away from our reliance on pay per nightly bed and breakfast and more into temporary accommodation. we're going to struggle to stop the flow, though. This is a national this is a national issue. Some green shoots that have just come out last week is we got some indicative figures about the increase in what's known as local housing allowance. So that's the increase in housing benefit, and that's going up approximately £20 a week, which will make a big difference to the affordability of the private rented sector. So that's a good sign. We've just got to make sure that private landlords don't desert the market at the same pace that we're seeing at the moment. But what that might mean is that we can get people out of temporary accommodation a bit quicker because there are more options available for them.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Looks like we're happy.
I think that completes our report.
Thank you very much.
To confirm, we are going to go to review these KPI in line with the new council plan, make sure they reflect the council's priorities, and that work will be undertaken with lead members to make sure that it correctly reflects their respective themes. Thank you, Chair.
Very much. I think the recommendation is that we note these performance indicators, which I think we have done. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for explaining those to us. So I think we've just got the work programme, the annual work programme.
Just on that, Councillor Kimber, I noticed the environmental agency is on that workload. Is that meant to stay on there? As we've seen.
No, that needs to come off there. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll take that off. Live West, I think, has been moved into April compared to last time. We're keeping building control, are we, in February?
We're keeping building control in February, and of course the major item is Fusion coming along and giving their report. So I haven't been to the task and finish group meetings, but I know you guys have been.
Councillor Vachon, are you happy with the progress the task and finish group is making on that?
Yes, that's fine. Chair, we've still got one meeting to go next week.
Thank you. So any other comments on the work programme?
Just for the new members, really, what we intend to do is once the council's delivery plan is approved at council, we will then schedule in to the ONS work programme lead members responsible for a particular theme of the delivery plan to come to overview and scrutiny and be scrutinised, and in terms of, are you on track to achieve the targets that are set out? Are you spending the money that you were given? Are you going to overspend them? That sort of questioning, and are we achieving the outcomes that were in the ambitions for the plan? So they will form, once that's agreed, they're not in there at the moment, but once that's agreed, they will slot into the work programme going forward. So that's how we did it last year. So.
That's good. Any other comments? I'm not sure how you feel about the meeting today, because there were comments about not having enough time and things like that. So, Councillor Southcott.
I think with South West Water, we could have spent double the time with them. And I think it's important that we follow up with that and keep having a go at them and build out things, making things improve.
The work group format will be good for that. So, yeah. Have you got a comment, Councillor Guthrie?
Good outcome that they seemed that they would be interested in properly discussing things in a different format, which good outcome.
Very good, Councillor Elliott.
Yes, I mean, I think although it felt slightly rushed, I don't think we could have got a lot more achieved in more time. So I thought it was chaired really well to keep it to time rather than waffling on, because I think what's really apparent is just how technical some of these areas are, and we're all a bit out of our depth, being frank. They're going to be able to pull the wool over our eyes because it's their bread and butter day job, whereas we're just trying to dip into it and represent our constituents. So having a working group that's more of an ongoing thing and really having a more focused discussion, because we feel it's not just a once and for all, but we can say, well, this time we really want to look at leaks, or this time we really want to look at pollution or storm overflows. Because there was loads that I would have loved to discuss with them, but it's really not the right venue for it. So I think it was great, the amount we managed to cover.
That's very good. Just to say that when I sort of said thank you very much at the end, Clarissa from the Environment Agency said there was no way that she could commit her resources or her to. They've just not got the resources. But so just to be clear, this will be South West Water, not South West Water and the EA. And that was understandable. I mean, I was trying to work out 12 people on agriculture in the southwest, and I was trying to work out, I wonder how many farms there are in the southwest, and it probably all got 1,000 farms each to look after or something. So it's just ridiculous. So yeah, I think that was good.
Which goes back to my point, no, they haven't got the resources, obviously, to do what they've got to do. But with the working group or whatever comes out of that, it might be good just to feed that back to the environmental agency so they've got an oversight of what is being said. And then if they wish to comment or whatever, then they have the opportunity. But I'm really pleased with that. That setup is better than what we actually asked for in some respects, isn't it? It really is a good step forward. Well done.
I don't want to extend the discussion too much because we're all tired, but just I think we do have particular things of being a rural borough that were being papered over there, because there was a lot of discussion about the monitoring that they're doing, but there's also a sort of customer base who are off-grid, quite a lot, which it would be really interesting to understand. And in terms of sort of efficiency, reducing pollution, I mean, it would be better for some of those off-grid places, which is vintage infrastructure, to actually be incorporated into South West Water. But at the moment, people don't necessarily trust South West Water to take on those assets. So there is actually quite a detailed piece of work that is quite specific to West Devon as a rural area that I think would be really good to do and would cut across a number of different priorities for the council as well.
Good. Any final comments? Thank you very much.
Yeah, well done.
It was a very interesting question, interesting day. Thank you very much for your support.